Hello, BookTube. Well, I have finally finished Journey to the West. I've been working on this since January. It's the end of October now, so I've been reading this for about 10 months. Now, this is volume 4 that I'm holding in my hand right now. I actually only have volume 4 with me because you can see here these are library books. Because library books have a due date, I initially checked them all out, thinking I would read them all before the due date. But then once I realized that wasn't going to happen, I returned them to the library and I would just check them out, check each volume out as I needed it. So volumes 1, 2, and 3 I have read, but they've been returned to the library now. So I'm only holding volume 4 here. So just use your imagination and imagine there are 4 more volumes of this same size that I'm holding up right now. This is, in my edition, not including the translators afterwards, about, sorry, not including the translators afterwards. Where does the actual story stop? 2,317 pages. Now, I'm not sure how well you can tell on camera, and my camera is going to show everything in reverse mirror image. Apologies for that. But this is quite small text with small margins here. So it could easily be more pages. And I was looking around on Goodreads, and it looks like in some editions it is more than those pages. But yeah, it's a big book, is my point. Now, I've been talking about this book a lot since I started reading it. I've been talking about it in my weekly reading vlogs, and I've also made an introductory video, and I've also reviewed each volume as I finished it, and I will try to remember to link to all of those in the description down below. But I've decided for the purpose of this video, I want to make this a video that's accessible to somebody who hasn't been watching this channel or who hasn't been watching all my other videos on this. In other words, I want to just start from the beginning, give the basic bare bones introduction of what this novel is, what it's about, and then just review it from there. And we'll see how this goes. There is a lot to talk about. And I'm doing these things unscripted, and if you watch this channel, you'll know I frequently ramble and make a mess out of things. But we'll see how things go. I'll definitely talk about something. So let's jump into it and see how we go. All right, Journey to the West is considered one of the 4 great classic Chinese novels. It's a name or it's a designation that you'll hear occasionally. The 4 great classic Chinese novels. Somebody actually asked me in my comments section in one of the previous videos, who decided what the 4 greatest ones were. And I actually didn't know. I just always, you just always hear about the 4 great classic novels. So I looked it up on Wikipedia, and apparently during the Qin dynasty, there were 4 novels that were regarded as masterpieces. This one was one of them, and then later Western scholars took to calling them the 4 great classic Chinese novels. That designation is probably somewhat arbitrary or somewhat subjective, at least. I'm sure there's a lot of Chinese literature, and who's to say that there's not another book that deserves that title. But whatever. It's commonly regarded as one of the 4 great Chinese novels. It was written in the 16th century. It is, I've discovered while I was reading this book around at work that there are a lot of my colleagues, people from America, Australia, England, who, if you said Journey to the West, they had no idea what you were talking about. But if I said, well, it's the one with the monkey and the pig, they were like, the Monkey King. So, like, I think some people are more familiar with it just with the monkey god or the monkey king. But yeah, that's the story. If that one helps you, it's the one about the monkey and the pig. But yeah, what it is exactly. So it's very loosely based on a real historical incident. In the 7th century, there was a Chinese Buddhist monk and scholar who journeyed to India to learn more about Buddhism and translated some of the original Indian Buddhist texts into Chinese and did a lot of other stuff as well. There was a whole book written about him by written about his travels by one of his disciples. He did all these amazing things. He was like a real guy. You can read the Wikipedia page on him maybe. But over the centuries, that story of him traveling to India to get the scriptures uh, started to get more and more retold and more exaggerated until it became the basis for a series of folk tales. So the basic story is he's traveling from China to India. He has a lot of wacky adventures along the way, and those were all the stories come in. Um, and as the title would imply, it's a journey story. Now, as the story got more and more elaborated through oral tradition, through the ages, various characters were added. There was a monkey who was added, uh, and there was a pig who was added. Those are the main ones. There are a couple other ones who maybe I'll talk about a little bit later. But the monkey, otherwise known as the monkey god or the monkey king, he's kind of this super powered being, and the pig, who also has some superpowers. And we'll see where this review takes me, but hopefully I'll get around to talking more about them in detail. Um, so there were a lot of stories in the oral tradition being told about the monk, the monkey, and the pig encountering various adventures on their way to India to pick up the Buddhist scriptures. Now the monk, I'm not sure at what stage this detail got added, but somewhere along the way, somebody decided that he was like the reincarnation of one of Buddha's disciples, known as the golden cicada. It is unclear to me, and I've tried to find this out. I've looked it up, but it's unclear to me whether this was a literal cicada or whether this was just a nickname. It is very clear in the world of this book that animal spirits are on the what do I want to say? Animal spirits can achieve enlightenment. So maybe it was a real cicada. If anybody knows, drop me a line in the comments and let me know. And in fact, that goes for everything I'm saying. If anybody can elaborate further on anything I'm saying, by all means, educate me in the comments. But yeah. He had been reincarnated so many times that his soul, his body was so pure that if any of the monsters ate his flesh, they would achieve immortality. And if any of the women monsters were to have sexual intercourse with him, through that they would achieve immortality. So the main story, which pops up over and over again, is there's a demon monster or a group of demon monsters who want to capture the monk and eat him, and then the monkey and the pig have to save the monk. A story which pops up with a little bit less frequency, but still gets repeated a few times. There's a woman demon, a she demon, who tries to seduce the monk, and again he has to be rescued by the pig and the monkey. So yeah, those were the folk tales, and they were written down sometime in the 16th century into this collection. And the author is, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong. I'm definitely going to pronounce this wrong. Wu Cheng'en. But as it's made very clear in the translator's introduction and the translator's afterwards, we're not really sure he's the guy who wrote it. We don't really know who wrote it. It's just the best guess that he may have been a candidate for having written it. I guess it's like the Homeric question, right? Who really wrote those poems? But yeah, this is a little bit more surprising to me that we don't know who wrote it, because it's, the 16th century is not so far removed from us as the dark age of ancient Greece. But for whatever reason, we don't have a clear idea who wrote it. But this novel, after it was written down, according to the translators afterwards, this just became the definitive version of that story. There had been various versions of it before, but it was so well told in this version that this became the definitive version. Tremendously culturally and literary, cultural, and literary important in China. I had a Chinese friend once who was trying to explain to me that if you would just read this book in the English translation, you're missing like all the references. And like actually, if you know Chinese history and you know Chinese culture, then everything in the book is like a reference to the politics of the time, or reference to religion of the time, or a satire on this or a satire on that. It reminded me a little bit of when I was reading Don Quixote, because people say the same thing about Don Quixote, right? Everything in Don Quixote is like a satire on Spanish society at that time, and there's all these commentaries about what it really means, and yet at the same time, you can just enjoy it as a normal story and be content to just miss all those references. In the same way, you can be more than content to enjoy Journey to the West as just a normal story and just miss all those references. And that was certainly true of me. Missed all the references, I'm sure. Still enjoyed this book as just a reading experience with a story. This edition I have here, it's translated by W.J.F. Jenner, does not have a lot of footnotes on it. There are some very brief notes at the end, just kind of given mostly to explaining ambiguous words that he's translated, but no references to the culture or the history or anything like that. And it's still perfectly readable, still perfectly comprehensible, just as a fantasy story. There are, I am told, other editions of this, which are much more heavily annotated and which will attempt to explain a lot more of those references to you. I've not, that's not the version I've read, but doing some research on the internet, it appears that those versions are out there. So, it's something to think about if you're ordering a version online, whether you want one with all the footnotes or whether you want to just enjoy the story and not worry about any of the references. But anyways, tremendously culturally and important in China, part of their literary history. I actually have never lived in China. I went to Beijing once as a tourist for a week when I was 19. I've never been back. But I have lived for a number of years in Asia, including 8 years in Japan and 8 years in Vietnam. And this story is very popular in Japan and Vietnam as well. In Japan, it's been adapted into a manga a couple of times. And in the 1970s or late 70s or early 80s, somewhere around there, it was adapted into a TV show called Monkey Magic, which was still sometimes being shown in reruns on TV when I was in Japan in the early 2000s, but was shown dubbed into English and shown in Australia and England I believe. It seems to have made a biggest impression on my Australian friends, friends of a similar age to me. Um, it's been made into TV shows many times over in China, and now that I'm living in Vietnam, I'm discovering that this is also a very popular story in Vietnam. Every Vietnamese person knows this story, mostly through the TV shows. I was talking to at least one Vietnamese friend who loved the TV show. Didn't actually know it was a book. But yeah, it's these Chinese TV shows that were dubbed into Vietnamese and were very popular here in Vietnam. So, having lived in Japan and Vietnam, and just getting a sense of how popular this story was in both of those countries, I somewhat had one of those penny dropping moments where I realized how culturally biased my own education had been, or how Eurocentric my own education had been. And it's one of those things, you always kind of know it. I mean, I always knew that I had come through my high school and college education without any knowledge of the Chinese classics. But I don't know, I just had kind of one of those dawning moments where it just kind of, I realized the significance that this was the literary canon of half the world. Not just China, but China, Vietnam. I'm told this story is also somewhat popular in Korea. Just Asia. And the fact that I had never had any exposure to this or any of the other great Chinese classics made me think, I can't really claim to be well read until I read these books someday. So I know that's kind of a vain reason to read a book, but this is BookTube, right? We're all bookish people. We're all pursuing the endless goal of being cultured and well read, and I decided that I was going to move the Chinese classics onto my reading list. And so I got these out of my school library in January and have been working through them ever since. Okay, so that's maybe enough background. Let's get into the reading experience a bit. The book is divided mainly into 3 sections, and I'm borrowing somewhat from the translators afterward in my edition, but it also seems just like it's common sense, something I would have thought of myself. There's an extended prologue in which we get everyone's backstories before they set out on their journey. And then there's the actual journey itself, which is episodic. They go to one place, they have an adventure. They go to the next place, they have an adventure. They go to the next place, they have an adventure. And then there's the ending of the book where they finally do get the Buddhist scriptures and come home. Now, the setup to the book, I actually no longer have chapter 1 with me. I've returned it to the library months ago. But as far as memory serves, I believe, I think it's the first 7 chapters are all the origin story of Monkey. Now, by the time this book is being written in the 16th century, the monk who actually made the journey is no longer the main character. He's a supporting character in his own story. It is now Monkey who is the central character in almost every chapter in this book. There are a handful of exceptions. So the spotlight is on Monkey, purely on Monkey. So Monkey is, even after having read the whole book, I feel like I don't have a firm handle on this. He is some sort of super-powered being He acquires more powers throughout his origin story. He learns the secret of Taoist meditation and learns all the. He takes elixirs from heaven and he just acquires a bunch of powers that way. But even when he was born, he's born out of this stone egg on a mountaintop on a tropical island. He's a monkey, but he's something more than a monkey, and he quickly becomes the rulers of all the other monkeys on his island, and he's living with them and he's feasting with them. And then after about 300 years or something like that, he gets depressed because he realizes that he's going to die someday. And what does it all mean, and what are we on Earth here for? So he goes and seeks enlightenment from what I believe is a Taoist sage. And it seems to have been the mythology of this period, or the beliefs of this period, that if you do meditation in the right way, and if you kind of purify your soul in such and such a way, you can acquire all these supernatural powers, like the ability to levitate and fly up on clouds and do all these magics. And Monkey acquires this. Then he and the monkeys he lives with on his island repel attacks from demons. He gets a little bit arrogant, and he starts demanding things from the other kingdoms, from the dragons of the sea. And eventually he ends up causing so much trouble that heaven comes down and tries to, at first, they're not sure what to do with him, so they give him a position in the heavenly court, thinking maybe that will satisfy his ego and keep him out of trouble. But his monkey keeps making more and more trouble, and they don't know what to do with him. Eventually they have a big battle to try to contain him. And now Monkey has become so superpowered at this point, partly because he's had all these secret elixirs up at heaven that he wasn't supposed to take, but he stole anyways, that it takes like all of heaven to subdue the monkey. Now, there are a lot of names being thrown around during these sections. There's the Emperor of Heaven, the Jade Emperor, and then there's like the King of Heaven, Lao Li or something. And Lao Li has a bunch of sons, and one of his sons is Moxa, is an apprentice to Guanyan, who is the Bodhisattva, not the Buddha, but the Bodhisattva, which is one of, I guess, Buddha's agents. She plays a big part in the early parts of this book, especially, and then throughout the book. She's like the female Buddha. If you've ever been to Asia or seen pictures of Asia, you can see these statues of Buddha, but it's a girl. That's the Bodhisattva Guanyin. Anyways, there are all of these names, and I, am given to understand that these are names that come from the pre-existing Chinese mythology. Now, the translator's introduction and afterword does kind of hint that there's a bit of mishmash of mythologies going on here. So there's the Taoist mythology maybe being mashed up with the Buddhist mythology, maybe being mashed up with older Chinese tradition. I don't really know, but these are, I think just all common mythological deities that the Chinese audience would have been already familiar with. So I imagine it would be like in the West if there was this super-powered monkey who was fighting against Zeus and Hera and Athena and Apollo and all the Greek gods. And I think that this wasn't exactly spelled out to me in this book or the translator's notes for it. But I imagine this was probably some sort of a subversion. That's just what I would imagine. So, you have all these super powerful gods, the Emperor of Heaven, who is normally in Chinese mythology, I think, like the controller of everyone's fate. And then there's just this mischievous monkey who is just upending everything in heaven, and nobody can control him. And he goes to the underworld, and there are all these deities of the underworld, which again I'm assuming would have been familiar to a Chinese audience. And he completely upends the underworld. He just causes chaos wherever he goes. And it is all wonderful to read. So yeah, I mean, maybe I should make that my. I'm 25 minutes into my review now, but maybe I should have started off with that. The main point of this review is that this thing is fun to read. Now, I'll get around to talking about this later. Maybe it does get repetitive. So certainly by the time you're in the 4th volume and you're reading like the 40th time that the monk has been captured by a demon who wants to eat him, at that point maybe you're getting a little bit tired of some of these repetitive stories. But that doesn't set in for quite some time. I think when you initially start reading this and you start reading about all these wonderful stories about the gods and the monkey fighting and all these bizarre adventures, it's really a lot of fun. So I would firmly put this down on my list of classic books that are fun to read. So I've got this theory about classic books, right? There are 2 types of classic books. There are some classic books that are hard work, like you should read them because they're classics, but they are difficult to get through. Things like Paradise Lost or Ulysses, or and then there are classic books that are classics just because they're really old and they've been really influential, but they're not dry and stuffy. They're just fun, things like Jules Verne or The Three Musketeers or something like that. And this book is definitely fun. Now it's long. If you want to be intimidated by its length, that's fair enough. But if you're thinking, oh, it's going to be difficult, and there's all of this going to be Chinese stuff, and I'm not going to catch the references to the politics of the time, just don't worry about that. It's a fun read. Okay, hopefully I've made my point on that. So eventually the monkey's imprisoned. I think that's the first 4 chapters. First 7 chapters. Then we get the backstory of the monk himself and his parents, and there's like this drama about how his father got killed by robbers or something like that. And then we get the backstory of the Emperor of China, and there's a little bit of a bizarre story here where he's not supposed to behead a dragon. So the dragon who's supposed to be beheaded for making it rain when it's not supposed to rain. The emperor promises him clemency and says that his executioner won't do it. But because it's a heavenly being, the gods just arrange for his executioner to do it in his dreams, and that still counts. So now the emperor has promised clemency to the dragon, but clemency has not been given. So now the emperor has some sort of bad karma or something like that, and gets sick and goes into the land of the dead, and then gets rescued out of the land of the dead and comes back completely dedicated to spiritualism and Buddhism and stuff like that. So that's another backstory that has to get sorted out. And then the quest to the west is set up with Guanyin, the Bodhisattva, arranging for the monk to make the journey to the west with the blessings of the Chinese emperor, who has this religious reawakening after being to the land of the dead and back. Oh, yeah, and by the way, that trip to the land of the dead is another really fun chapter. Just so imaginative, all the things he sees in the land of the dead. The book on the whole is really imaginative. There's just a lot of fantastical stuff in there that's well done. And then they go on their journey to the west, and Monkey has been imprisoned by the gods 500 years ago. We've jumped forward 500 years time here. And he is freed from his imprisonment on the condition that he helps the monk on this journey. And Monkey is completely committed to it, but he still has his mischievous side. He still likes causing trouble. Then they journey a little bit further, and they encounter a pig. Now, like the monkey, he's a pig, but not really a pig. He's got his own backstory, where he was one of the people in the bureaucracy of heaven, the great curtain raiser or something like that. And he got drunk and he assaulted one of the moon maidens, and so he was banished down to Earth. And something about how when he was getting reborn, he was into a pig's body, so he got reborn as a pig, even though he's originally a heavenly being. He is it's a pig, but it's like a man pig, if that makes sense. It's an anthropomorphic pig, so he walks on two legs. He's got a rake weapon, which he holds with his hands, but he does have like pig ears and a pig snout and stuff like that. And then they encounter some sort of sand demon, who in this translation is referred to as Friar Sand, who also joins their quest. Now, Friar Sand doesn't have much of a personality. He's in all the stories, and he takes place in the fighting, but he pretty much just plays the straight man here. The translators afterward, in my edition, said that Friar Sand was probably from an older tradition, and by the 16th century he was too well established to leave him out, so they had to write him in, but he was not one of the more interesting characters. The interesting dynamic is Monkey and the pig. So pig is also superpowered like Monkey, but Monkey is really clever. Pig can be clever. He can also be a bit stupid. I think it varies a little bit from story to story depending on what the story arc needs to be. But he's also lazy and greedy and a glutton, and he loves sex. Now since he's been converted to Buddhism, he's supposed to give up women. But there are times when they're put into temptation by beautiful women who are usually demons just pretending to be women. And Pig would be the one who would always kind of fall for that, whereas he'd always be easy prey for being seduced by the women and get himself into ridiculous situations. Monkey has a rivalry with Pig, partly because he just loves playing practical jokes. Monkey's really mischievous, and Pig is an easy target. And partly because there's a little bit of sibling rivalry going on between them. They are both serving the monk, and they are convinced, the monkey is convinced that the monk is kinder to the pig. So there's some jealousy going on, and the pig's a bit jealous of Monkey as well. So the pig will frequently badmouth Monkey to the monk, and there's that rivalry going on between them, which leads to a lot of comic situations and is a lot of fun. Like I said, this book can be a lot of fun. There is last a dragon which gets transformed into one of their horses. Into their horse. So they start off with a horse. The original horse, they lose it. I think it gets eaten. I don't remember. And the dragon has got got to work off some bad deeds, so he gets transformed into the horse. And for most of the story, we kind of forget that the horse is actually a dragon. And again, I suspect this comes from the fact that this is partly just a collection of a bunch of stories that have originated over time by many different writers. So maybe not everybody knew that the dragon was really a horse, or maybe that was in some versions of the story, but not in others. There are, I think, maybe 2 or 3 times where they seem to remember that the horse is actually a dragon, but then most of the rest of the time they just forget it and just refer to it as the horse. There is one time where the horse disguised as a dragon transforms into a human and actually has a part in the adventure. But that's only one story out of 40. They can transform. I forgot to mention that. But monkey, pig, the dragon at least one time are able to transform into various different things. So by the time we get all the crew together, it's almost the end of volume 1. I forget how many chapters we're in at that point. Almost to the end of volume 1. And then the rest of volume 1, and then volumes 2 and 3, and most of volume 4 are just the adventures, the various stories. So yeah, let's talk about the stories here. And I guess I'll start off with the negatives first. The negative is it's very repetitive. Now it's repetitive in the broad sense, meaning that there's a very common story structure. There's a demon who wants to eat the monk. They have to fight against the demon to save the monk. That's the story. Then they go to the next town. There's a demon who wants to eat the monk. They have to fight against the demon to save the monk. End of story. Go to the next town. But it's also more than that. It's repetitive in some oddly specific details. So there are some story details which get repeated multiple times over. So one of them is that it will turn out that this demon that they are fighting is actually not really a demon. It's one of the escaped pets from heaven. So occasionally it will be well, again, this is one of those cases where I think it would be useful to know more Chinese mythology. I think in almost all of these cases, a Chinese audience would have recognized who the escaped pet is. So like it's the lion that Lord Li, King of Heaven, always rides on. And maybe a Chinese audience would have been like, oh, right, that lion. Okay, yeah, Lord Li is always on that lion. But, you know, for me, as somebody who's ignorant of all that, I just, you know, have to assume that this is something that would have been familiar to the audience. There was 1 or 2 times where I actually recognized who it was. One was when the demon turned out to be the rabbit from the moon, the jade rabbit. Now this one was something I did recognize because in Japan and in China and a lot of these Asian countries, they don't have a man in the moon. They have a rabbit in the moon, and there are various stories about the rabbit in the moon. And as luck would have it, I was actually reading that chapter during Mid-Autumn Festival here in Vietnam, which is a moon festival, and there were decorations of rabbits everywhere for the Mid-Autumn Festival. And I was like, here I am reading about that just while I'm seeing this everywhere. So that was one time I made the connection. But most of the time, I just assumed it was some sort of animal I would know about. Sorry, I'm rambling, aren't I? I'm going off on a bit of a digression. I do that sometimes. The point I wanted to make is that quite often, a story element will be that the demon will turn out to be an escaped heavenly pet or heavenly being. And Monkey is stopped from killing them at the last moment, so that they can return to being the pet or up in heaven. So that's one story element that's repeated. And there are a few other story elements, like the demon will disguise himself as a human. Monkey will recognize that it's immediately a demon and either kill it or scare it away with his iron cudgel, which is Monkey's signature weapon. The monk will be horrified. Monkey will try to explain that it was not a human, it was a demon in disguise. The monk will not believe it. Monkey and the monk will fight over it. And that's a storyline that gets repeated a couple of times. These kind of specific details where you're like, geez, I read this already. This is very similar to something we read already. So I was suspecting as I read through the book, without really even knowing anything about it, that these must have been folk tales that were kind of spreading in certain regions. Maybe one story was borrowing from another story, and then they all got compiled by a later author. And when I finally got to the end of volume 4 and was reading the translators afterward, he pretty much confirmed that is exactly what was going on. So, it reminds me of Grimm Brothers fairy tales, which I read through from beginning to end and reviewed on this channel a couple years ago. And Grimm's Brothers fairy tales also had a lot of stories with very oddly specific reoccurring story elements. And that was because, they were separate stories, but they were coming from the same tradition, where people in different villages were telling their own slightly different variation of this same story. So I think that's what's going on here a little bit. Which maybe brings me to my next point, is that this is not to be read so much as a novel. It's meant to be read as a collection of stories. And I think that's where you would get the most enjoyment out of it. Don't... And I know on BookTube we all have like reading goals, like must read 100 books this year, where you're just trying to kind of push on through there, and me as well. But that I think is the wrong way to approach this. You want to approach this as kind of like a general anthology of stories that you would pick up and read at a leisurely pace. So, one story at a time, kind of enjoy it, savor it. Certainly when I got to volume 4, the last couple months I've been reading this, I made it a point to not push myself to do more than one story a week. Now, a story can cover 1 chapter, 2 chapters, 3 chapters, sometimes as much as 5 chapters, depending. Some of these stories are shorter, and some of these stories are longer. But they are broken off into individual stories, and then one story will end, and then the next story will begin. Now, whoever wrote this book did make sort of an effort to make it into to smooth out the continuity here. So even though it mostly reads as a collection of different stories, there are callbacks to previous stories. They'll occasionally, the characters will say, "Oh, this is quite similar to that other adventure we had back in that town," or "Do you remember when this happened 3 chapters ago?" So like there are these threads that kind of link stuff back and give you a sense that there is an author kind of looking to smooth this all out. I did get the sense that Monkey's powers were inconsistent, that he would have these powers to do one thing in one story, and then he wouldn't use them in another story when they could have helped him out in the other story. But I don't know. I'm mostly sure that the powers are kind of inconsistent, but I might be wrong on this. Maybe there is an explanation why he didn't use why his powers appear to be inconsistent from chapter to chapter, or why he didn't use certain powers in one case. Yeah. So I mean, let me get to the positives here. The positives are that even within that somewhat repetitive story elements or story frameworks, uh, the the imagination and fantasy kind of going on here is a lot of fun. So it's very much a world in which everything has a spirit and everything can kind of come alive, and all the animals are able to achieve enlightenment, to get Taoist powers from meditation. Um, so Monkey is not a human, but he's able to study the Taoist meditations and get these superpowers, as are all the other animals. So they'll go into a mountain and they'll be fighting these demons, but the demons will be linked to various animal spirits. So there'll be wolf demons or bear demons or leopard demons or rhinoceros demons or elephant demons or water buffalo demons. There are several adventures that take place underwater in one form or another, either in the ocean or under a river or in the bottom of a well or lake, where there's always some sort of underwater kingdom there. The dragons seem to be associated with the underwater kingdoms, but then the dragons will have this whole army where it's described with the various sea creatures. So you have like the sea turtles and the eels and the crabs and the lobsters, and just everybody is part of the army. That's in some passages it even describes them kind of carrying weapons or wearing armor. You can just imagine like Finding Nemo, but all the creatures of the sea, but geared up for battle. The stars from the sky, the constellations will come down and join in some of the battles. The plants has spirits. There's at least one story where the priest, the monk is kidnapped by various plant spirits, and he has to argue with them. Bamboo sprouts that have sprung out, or trees. There's a story where they get captured by spider spirits, and they have to fight with all these insect spirits that are part of the spider's extended family. And it's just the plus all the mythology of the heavenly kingdoms and the land of the dead. It's just such a rich mythology, and I have waited all these years, well into middle age at this point, and never really gotten into Chinese mythology or Chinese literature. I've been into Greek mythology, Christian mythology, Norse mythology, but I just thought, well, Chinese mythology, that just seems so weird, and I don't know any of the stories, and I can't be bothered with it. But after reading this book, I feel like this is a lot of fun. Like, this is a mythological world that I would love to play around in more, and to have more stories from this. And the translators afterward, in my version, says that although these stories are all coming from this extended oral tradition, the author of this book definitely does have an authorial voice. I mean, again, as I said before, we're not quite sure who wrote it. Maybe it's Wu Cheng'en, maybe it's not. But whoever wrote it, they were definitely adding their own spin on it, and making it uh, making it their own way of telling the story. And yeah, the yeah, the pure amount of variation of just all the different creatures in this world, or the idea that everything has some sort of spirit that can become superpowered or become a demon, really captured my imagination. There is, well, I'm talking about the style of this book. There is a lot of poetry mixed in. So maybe you can kind of, this is more or less at random, but maybe you can get the idea. So prose, and then a little poem mixed in here. And then prose, and then extended poem. And then prose, and then a little poem here. And then a poem to start off the next chapter, and then prose. So there's a lot of poetry mixed in with it. Now, the translators afterward, in my edition, says the poetry was not part of the oral tradition. That is something that was added in by the author just to kind of, I don't know, just because he liked writing poetry and he wanted to have fun with some wordplay. And as always with translated poetry, I think you really just have to say, well, who knows what it's like in the original Chinese, right? I mean, my hats off to the translator of this for translating all this verse and usually giving it a rhyme scale. Sometimes he gives up on the rhyme, the translator, but usually he gets it. So here's just a random poem I opened up to. Thick, heavy clouds, lowering black mists, the rumbling of the thunder cart, the searing flash of lightning, a roaring gale, or torrential downpour. Indeed, one thought goes up to heaven. 10,000 hopes are all fulfilled. Because the great sage has used his powers, the landscape is darkened for thousands of miles. The wonderful rain falls like rivers and seas, hiding the country and heavens from sight. Water comes pouring down the eaves, noiselessly pounding outside the windows. Actually, that may be an example of where the translator more or less gave up on the rhyme scheme. Yeah, there are other examples where he does try to put in the rhymes here. The translator does put in the English rhymes. Now, this may be just a personal thing, although I suspect other people share the same flaw. I found it very hard to concentrate when I was reading the rhymes. You know, my mind just wants to blank out because they're not really advancing the plot that much. Quite often I would just blank out on the rhymes. Very rarely is something mentioned in the rhymes which is not repeated in the prose section of the story. So I think you could just end up almost skipping over the rhymes if you wanted to. I did my best with them, but I really had to force myself to concentrate on those rhymes. Sometimes had to make myself go back and read it again once I realized I had tuned it out. So the rhymes slowed my reading speed down a little bit on this. What was without the rhymes, I'd say that it's a very easy read, a very pleasant read. The rhymes slow it down a little bit. The poems is what I mean to say. The poems slow it down a little bit. Now, poems aside, it reads just like a modern story, or like it reads kind of like a fairy tale, but like a modern telling of a fairy tale. And that, of course, is not because of the original Chinese, but because this translation was translated in 1984. So it's translated into modern English. It's one of the things about reading the classics in translation is you get to cheat a little bit. So, it was written in 16th century Chinese, but there's no reason why we have to read it in 16th century English. If you're going to translate it anyways, you can translate it into modern English, huh? So, now, I read some people on the internet saying, well, if you don't read it in the original Chinese, you're not really getting the flavor, and you don't understand how boastful monkey is that only comes across in the original Chinese. And yeah, fine, sure. If I could read the original Chinese, I would be a much better man. I'm sure. But I enjoyed this plenty just in the English, and if there were some nuances about how boastful monkey was being that are only in the original Chinese, fine. I've missed those, I guess. Um. Okay. There is a lot more to talk about, but I've rambled on for an hour, so I'm feeling a little bit exhausted with talking. I can only imagine that you guys are feeling a little bit sick of listening to me if you've even made it this far in the video. So let's just stop it here, huh? I mean, there's tons more we could talk about, but we don't need to talk about everything, huh? We've talked about some things, and that will be good enough for today. I thank you, BookTube.